The Iron Horse pulled into Sioux Falls, South Dakota on a blistering afternoon in June 1878, carrying more than freight and passengers. And Samuel Crawford stood on the platform watching men unload crates with a sinking feeling in his gut that something was about to change his life forever. He had been expecting livestock, maybe some farming equipment to settle the debt Marcus Halloway owed him, but when he saw the railroad agent walking toward him with a young woman in tow, her wrists bound with rope and her dress covered in dust from the long journey, every muscle in his body went rigid with fury. "Mr. Crawford," the agent called out, his voice carrying that false cheerfulness men used when they knew they were part of something shameful. "Got your payment here from Mr. Halloway. Says she'll work off what he owes you, and she's young enough to give you plenty of years of service." Samuel looked at the woman, really looked at her, and saw eyes the color of storm clouds staring back at him with a mixture of defiance and exhaustion. She could not have been more than 22 or 23, with dark hair that had come loose from its pins and a face that would have been beautiful if it were not drawn tight with hunger and fear. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "What is your name?" He asked her directly, ignoring the agent entirely. She lifted her chin, and he saw a spark of something fierce in those gray eyes. "Victoria Zimmerman." "Well, Miss Zimmerman, I am deeply sorry that Marcus Halloway is the kind of man who would use another human being as currency." He turned to the agent, his voice dropping to something cold and dangerous. "You can tell Mr. Halloway that his debt remains unpaid, and if he ever sets foot near my ranch again, I will not be responsible for what happens. No woman is currency in my home, and I will not be party to treating anyone like property." The agent's false smile faltered. "Now, Mr. Crawford, a debt is a debt. Mr. Halloway signed papers saying this woman would satisfy what he owes. Then those papers are not worth the ink they are printed with." Samuel reached forward and carefully untied the rope around Victoria's wrists, his movements gentle despite the rage coursing through him. "Miss Zimmerman is free to go wherever she pleases. If she chooses to stay in Sioux Falls, I will help her find honest work and a place to stay. If she wants to go somewhere else, I will pay for her ticket myself." Victoria rubbed her wrists where the rope had left angry red marks, staring at Samuel like he was some kind of creature she had never encountered before. "You are refusing payment for a debt." "I am refusing to treat a human being like livestock," he corrected. "Marcus Halloway owes me $1,500 for the cattle I sold him last year. That is between him and me, and it has nothing to do with you." "But I have nowhere to go," she said quietly, and for the first time he heard the vulnerability beneath that defiant exterior. "Mr. Halloway bought my father's gambling debts 3 months ago. When my father could not pay, Mr. Halloway said I would work for him until the debt was settled. He was supposed to give me work in his household, but instead he put me on this train and sent me west like a piece of furniture." Samuel felt his jaw tighten. Marcus Halloway was even worse than he had thought, and that was saying something. "Where are you from, Miss Zimmerman?" "Philadelphia. My father was a professor at the university until he developed a taste for cards and whiskey." She looked down at her hands, those rope-marked wrists. "He died 2 weeks after Mr. Halloway bought his debts. Heart gave out, the doctor said, but I think it was shame that killed him." The summer sun beat down on the wooden platform, and Samuel could see sweat beading on Victoria's forehead. She swayed slightly, and he realized she was probably half-starved and dehydrated from the journey. "Miss Zimmerman, would you do me the honor of allowing me to buy you a meal? We can discuss your options when you have had some food and water." She looked at him with those storm-gray eyes, searching his face for some hidden motive. "Why are you being kind to me? You do not know me." "Because it is the right thing to do," he said simply. and because I have a mother and two sisters back in Texas, and I would hope that if they ever found themselves in your situation, someone would show them the same courtesy." Victoria nodded slowly, and Samuel offered her his arm. She hesitated only a moment before taking it, and he could feel how thin she was through the fabric of her dress. The agent was still sputtering behind them about debts and obligations, but Samuel ignored him completely as he guided Victoria down the platform toward the main street of Sioux Falls. The town was not much to look at, just a collection of wooden buildings clustered around the Big Sioux River, but it was growing fast with the arrival of the railroad. Samuel had moved here 2 years ago to start his ranch, drawn by the good grazing land and the promise of a place where a man could build something lasting. He had done well for himself, running cattle and breaking horses, and his reputation as an honest dealer had earned him respect among the other ranchers and townspeople. He took Victoria to the Dakota Hotel, where Mrs. Henderson ran a dining room that served the best food in town. The older woman's eyes went wide when she saw Victoria's condition, and she immediately ushered them to a corner table and brought out a pitcher of cold water and a basket of fresh bread. "You look like you have been through hell and back, child," Mrs. Henderson said bluntly. "Let me get you some proper food." Victoria drank 2 full glasses of water before she touched the bread, and Samuel watched her carefully, making sure she did not eat too fast and make herself sick. When Mrs. Henderson brought out plates of roast chicken, potatoes, and vegetables, Victoria's eyes actually filled with tears. "I have not had a real meal in weeks," she admitted. "Mr. Halloway kept me locked in a room in his house in Chicago. He said I needed to learn my place before he sent me west. He gave me bread and water, nothing else." Samuel felt that cold rage settle deeper into his bones. Marcus Halloway is going to answer for what he has done. "He is a powerful man," Victoria said, cutting into her chicken with the kind of careful precision that spoke of good breeding and education. "He owns 3 banks and has connections all over the Midwest. My father owed him $12,000. Even if I worked for years, I could never pay that back." "Your father's debts died with him," Samuel said firmly. "And even if they did not, no amount of money justifies what Halloway did to you. What he did was kidnapping, pure and simple." Victoria ate slowly, methodically, and Samuel could see her regaining strength with every bite. She had good posture despite her exhaustion, and her hands moved with an elegance that spoke of a privileged upbringing before everything fell apart. He found himself curious about her, about the life she had lived before Marcus Halloway destroyed it. "Tell me about yourself, Mr. Crawford," she said after a while, setting down her fork. "You seem to be a man of principle in a world that has precious few of them." "I am just a rancher trying to make an honest living," he said, uncomfortable with the praise. "My father was a lawman in Texas, and he raised me and my sisters to believe that how you treat people matters more than how much money you have. I came up here to South Dakota because I wanted land of my own, and I wanted to be somewhere I could build something lasting. Do you have a family here? No wife, if that is what you are asking." He found himself studying her face, the way the light from the window brought out hints of auburn in her dark hair. "I have been too busy building the ranch to think much about courting. My parents are still in Texas with my sisters. Rebecca just got married last year, and Sarah is teaching at the school in our hometown." "They sound wonderful," Victoria said, and there was a wistfulness in her voice that made his chest ache. "They are. My mother would take a switch to me if she knew I had let any woman be treated the way Halloway treated you." He leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "Miss Zimmerman, I meant what I said on the platform. You are free to do whatever you want. But if you need a place to stay while you figure out your next steps, I can arrange a room here at the hotel. Mrs. Henderson is a good woman, and she might even know of some work opportunities in town." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her water glass. "Mr. Crawford, I appreciate your kindness more than I can say, but I have to be honest with you. I have no money, no family, and no prospects. Mr. Halloway made sure that any friends my father had in Philadelphia would not help me. If I stay in Sioux Falls, I will need to find work immediately, and I do not know what skills I have that would be valuable in a frontier town." "What did you do before?" Samuel asked. "I was a teacher. I studied literature and history at a women's college in Pennsylvania, and I taught at a girls' school in Philadelphia for 3 years." Her expression turned bitter. "But when my father's gambling debts became known, the school dismissed me. They said they could not have someone of questionable character teaching their daughters." Samuel felt his respect for her growing. She was educated, intelligent, and stronger than she probably realized. "Miss Zimmerman, Sioux Falls has a school, and it is always in need of teachers. The town is growing fast, and there are more children every month. I know the school board chairman, Thomas Wright. If you are interested, I could introduce you to him." Hope flared in her eyes, bright and almost painful to see. "You would do that for me." "I would," he said simply. "But first, you need rest and a chance to recover from your journey. Let me arrange a room for you here, and tomorrow we can start figuring out your future." Mrs. Henderson was more than happy to provide Victoria with a room, and Samuel paid for a week in advance, despite Victoria's protests. He also arranged for the hotel to provide her with clean clothes and whatever else she needed, and by the time he left her at the door to her room, some of the exhaustion had faded from her face. "Mr. Crawford," she said as he turned to leave, "why are you doing all this? You do not owe me anything." He looked at her standing in the doorway of that modest hotel room, her borrowed dress hanging on her thin frame, and felt something shift in his chest. "Maybe I am doing it because someone should. Or maybe I am doing it because I look at you and see someone who deserves a second chance. Either way, Miss Zimmerman, you are safe now. That is all that matters." He left the hotel and walked back to where he had tied his horse, his mind churning with thoughts of Victoria Zimmerman and the injustice that had been done to her. He had told the truth when he said he was just trying to do the right thing, but he could not deny that there was something about her that had captured his attention. The way she held her head high even when she was at her lowest, the intelligence in her eyes, the careful dignity with which she moved through the world, all of it spoke to a strength of character that he found himself admiring. The ride back to his ranch took him through rolling prairie land dotted with wildflowers and the occasional stand of cottonwood trees. The Big Sioux River wound through the landscape like a silver ribbon, and the sky stretched overhead in endless blue. This was the land he had fallen in love with when he first came to Dakota Territory, the wide open spaces where a man could breathe and build and dream. His ranch sat on 200 acres of prime grazing land about 5 miles outside of town. The house was modest but solid, built from good lumber and designed to withstand the harsh winters. He had a barn, a corral for breaking horses, and enough cattle to make a decent living. It was not a grand estate, but it was his, earned through hard work and honest dealing. His ranch hand, an older man named Pete Thompson who had come west after the war, was mending fence when Samuel rode up. Pete took one look at Samuel's face and whistled low. "That is the expression of a man who has had his day turned upside down," Pete observed. "What happened in town?" Samuel dismounted and told Pete the whole story, from the moment he saw Victoria being led off the train to the conversation over dinner at the hotel. Pete listened without interrupting, his weathered face growing increasingly grim. "Marcus Halloway always was a snake," Pete said when Samuel finished. "But this is low even for him. What are you going to do about the debt he owes you?" "I will figure it out," Samuel said. "Right now, I am more concerned about making sure Miss Zimmerman is taken care of. I told her I would introduce her to Thomas right about the teaching position." Pete gave him a knowing look. "She must be something special if you are going to all this trouble." "She is a woman who was treated badly and deserves help," Samuel said firmly. "That is all. If you say so, boss." Pete's expression suggested he did not believe that for a second, but he was wise enough not to push. "You want me to ride into town with you tomorrow when you make those introductions?" "No, but I appreciate the offer. I think Miss Zimmerman might be more comfortable if it is just me." Large groups of men probably are not her favorite thing right now. That night, Samuel lay in his bed and stared at the ceiling, unable to stop thinking about Victoria Zimmerman. He kept seeing those storm-gray eyes, the way she had lifted her chin even when her wrists were bound, the quiet dignity with which she had acknowledged her desperate situation. She was unlike any woman he had ever met, and something about her called to something deep inside him that he had not even known was there. He told himself he was just being a decent human being, that anyone would have done the same thing in his position. But as sleep finally claimed him, his last thought was of Victoria's face when he had told her no woman was currency in his home, and the way hope had bloomed in her expression like a flower opening to the sun. The next morning dawned clear and bright, and Samuel rode into town early to check on Victoria. He found her in the hotel dining room, looking remarkably better after a night of sleep and a hearty breakfast. Mrs. Henderson had found her a simple but clean dress in deep blue that actually fit, and someone had helped her pin up her hair. She looked like a completely different person from the exhausted, frightened woman who had stepped off the train. "Mr. Crawford," she said, rising when she saw him. "I was hoping you would come. I wanted to thank you properly for everything you have done." "No thanks necessary," he said, but he could not help the way his eyes lingered on her. The blue dress brought out the color of her eyes, and now that she was rested and fed, he could see the true beauty that had been hidden beneath the exhaustion. "Are you feeling well enough to meet Thomas right today?" "I sent word to him last night, and he is expecting us at the schoolhouse at 10 o'clock. "I am ready," she said, and he could hear the determination in her voice. "Mr. Crawford, I have been thinking about everything you said yesterday, and I have decided that I want to make a new life here in Sioux Falls. I do not want to go back east, where everyone knows about my father's disgrace. I want to start fresh, and if I can teach again, that would be more than I ever hoped for." Samuel felt something warm spread through his chest at her words. "Then let us go see about making that happen." The schoolhouse was a simple wooden building near the center of town, with rows of desks and a blackboard that had seen better days. Thomas Wright was waiting for them, a thin man in his 50s with wire-rimmed spectacles and a gentle demeanor. Samuel made the introductions and then stepped back to let Victoria speak for herself. She impressed Thomas immediately with her knowledge and her passion for teaching. She talked about the books she loved, the methods she had used at the girls' school in Philadelphia, and her belief that every child deserved access to education, regardless of their station in life. Thomas asked her questions about mathematics and geography, about how she would handle a classroom with children of different ages and abilities, and she answered every question with confidence and thoughtfulness. "Miss Zimmerman," Thomas said finally, "I would be honored to have you teach at our school. We have been struggling to find qualified teachers willing to come to Dakota Territory, and you are far more educated than anyone I expected to find." The position pays $35 a month, and it includes a small cabin behind the schoolhouse where you can live. Classes start in September, which gives you the summer to settle in and prepare your curriculum. Does that sound acceptable? Victoria's eyes shone with tears she was clearly trying to hold back. Mr. Wright, it sounds more than acceptable. It sounds like an answer to prayers I was afraid to even speak out loud. Thank you. They shook hands, and Thomas promised to have the cabin cleaned and ready for her within the week. Samuel walked Victoria back to the hotel, acutely aware of how close she was walking beside him, the way her shoulder occasionally brushed against his arm. "I cannot believe this is happening," she said, her voice full of wonder. "Yesterday I was a prisoner being shipped west like cargo, and today I have a job and a home and a future. Mr. Crawford, I owe you everything." "You owe me nothing," he said firmly. "You earned that position on your own merit. I just made the introduction." They stopped in front of the hotel, and Victoria turned to face him fully. In the bright morning sunlight, he could see flecks of silver in her gray eyes, like stars scattered across a stormy sky. "May I ask you a personal question, Mr. Crawford?" "Of course." "Why did you really help me? And please do not say it is just because it was the right thing to do. I have met many men in my life who knew what the right thing was but did nothing when it mattered. You went out of your way for a complete stranger, and I want to understand why." Samuel considered her question carefully, aware that his answer mattered more than he could fully articulate. "I suppose it is because I have always believed that how we treat the most vulnerable among us says everything about who we really are. You were vulnerable, and you needed help, and I was in a position to give it. But if I am being completely honest, Miss Zimmerman, there is something else too." "What is that?" "When I looked at you on that platform yesterday, I saw someone who refused to be broken by circumstances that would have destroyed most people. I saw strength and dignity and courage, and I thought that someone like that deserved every chance to build the life they want. I still think that." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. "You are a remarkable man, Samuel Crawford. I hope I have the opportunity to repay your kindness someday." "Just build a good life here," he said. "That will be repayment enough." But as he rode back to his ranch that afternoon, Samuel knew he was lying to himself. He wanted more than to see Victoria build a good life. He wanted to be part of that life. The realization startled him with its intensity, and he tried to tell himself he was being foolish. He had known her for barely a day. He knew almost nothing about her beyond the basic facts of her story. Yet something about Victoria Zimmerman had reached inside him and taken hold, and he suspected that his life had changed forever the moment she stepped off that train. Over the next few weeks, Samuel found himself making excuses to ride into town more often than usual. He would tell Pete he needed supplies, or that he wanted to check on the horse he was having shod at the blacksmith, but the truth was he wanted to see Victoria. She was staying at the hotel until her cabin behind the schoolhouse was ready, and Samuel discovered that she had a habit of taking walks along the river in the early evening. It was on one of those evenings that he accidentally encountered her for the third time in a week, and she smiled at him with an expression that suggested she knew exactly what he was doing. "Mr. Crawford, if you wanted to spend time with me, you could simply ask rather than pretending to stumble across me by chance," she said, amusement dancing in her eyes. Samuel felt his face heat. "Am I that obvious?" "Completely," she said, but her tone was warm rather than mocking. "Would you like to walk with me? I find the river very peaceful in the evenings." They fell into step together, following the path along the water's edge. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, and the air was filled with the sound of birdsong and the gentle rush of the current. "How are you settling in?" Samuel asked. "Is Mrs. Henderson treating you well at the hotel?" "She is wonderful," Victoria said. "She has been teaching me about life in Dakota Territory, and she introduced me to several women in town. Everyone has been very kind, though I suspect some of that kindness is because you told people to look out for me. I might have mentioned to a few people that you were new in town and could use some friendly faces," Samuel admitted. "But any kindness you are receiving is because people like you, not because I ask them to be nice." "I like it here," Victoria said softly. "It is so different from Philadelphia. Everything is open and new, and people seem to care more about what you do than who your family is or what kind of house you live in. I feel like I can breathe here." "I felt the same way when I first came," Samuel said. "There is something about this land that gets into your blood. The space, the freedom, the sense that you can build whatever kind of life you want." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, and Samuel found himself acutely aware of Victoria's presence beside him. The way her skirt swished as she walked, the way the evening light caught the auburn tones in her dark hair, the delicate curve of her profile when she turned to look at the river, all of it seemed to imprint itself on his consciousness with startling clarity. "Can I ask you something, Mr. Crawford?" Victoria said eventually. "You can, and you can also call me Samuel. I think we know each other well enough now to dispense with formality." "Samuel, then," she said, and he liked the way his name sounded in her voice. "What made you come to Dakota Territory? You mentioned building something lasting, but what were you building toward?" Samuel thought about how to answer that. "I suppose I was building toward a sense of purpose. My father was the sheriff in our town for 30 years, and he was the kind of man everyone respected. My whole life, I watched him serve his community and make a real difference in people's lives. When he died 5 years ago, I realized I wanted to build something that mattered too, something I could be proud of. The ranch is that for me. It is a place I am creating from nothing, a legacy I can build with my own hands." "That is beautiful," Victoria said. "And what about the future? Do you want a family someday, children to inherit this legacy you are building?" "I do," Samuel said honestly. "I always figured I would get married eventually, have some kids, grow old on that land. But I never met anyone who made me want to stop building and start living, if that makes sense. I was always so focused on the work that I never made time for anything else." "And now?" Victoria asked, and there was something in her voice that made his pulse quicken. "Now I am starting to wonder if maybe I have been focusing on the wrong things," he said carefully. "It is hard to care about building a legacy when there is no one to share it with." Victoria stopped walking and turned to face him, the setting sun behind her creating a halo of golden light around her hair. "Samuel, I need to tell you something. I know we have only known each other for a few weeks, but you have been on my mind constantly. I keep thinking about how you stood up for me when you had no reason to, how you saw me as a person when everyone else saw me as property. I have never met anyone like you, and I find myself wanting to know everything about you. Is that foolish of me?" Samuel's heart was pounding so hard he was sure she must be able to hear it. "If it is foolish, then I am a fool too, because I have been thinking the exact same thing. Victoria, from the moment I saw you on that platform, something in me recognized something in you. I know it sounds impossible after such a short time, but I cannot stop thinking about you. I cannot stop wanting to be near you." "Then be near me," she said simply, and she closed the distance between them. Samuel reached out and gently cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. Her skin was soft and warm, and when she looked up at him with those storm-gray eyes, he felt like he was falling into something vast and terrifying and wonderful all at once. "I want to court you properly," he said. "I want to do this the right way. You deserve that." "I appreciate that," Victoria said, and she covered one of his hands with hers. "But Samuel, I think we both know that there is something between us that goes beyond conventional courtship. I do not need flowers and poetry. I need honesty and respect and someone who sees me for who I really am." "You have already given me all of that." "Then what do you need?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I need you to kiss me," she whispered. Samuel lowered his head slowly, giving her every chance to change her mind, but Victoria only rose up on her toes to meet him. When their lips finally touched, it was like coming home to a place he had never been before. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but then Victoria's arms came up around his neck and Samuel pulled her closer, and suddenly there was nothing tentative about it at all. They broke apart finally, both breathing hard, and Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "Victoria Zimmerman, you are going to be the end of me." "I certainly hope not," she said with a soft laugh. "I rather like you alive and well." They walked back to town hand in hand, and Samuel could not remember ever feeling this happy. It seemed impossible that just a few weeks ago he had been standing on that train platform with no idea that his entire life was about to change. Now he could not imagine a future that did not include Victoria. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Sioux Falls had ever seen. Samuel was nothing if not determined to show Victoria that she was cherished, and he set about courting her with the same focus and intensity he brought to everything else in his life. He brought her wildflowers from the prairie, took her on picnics by the river, taught her to ride horses so they could explore the countryside together. Victoria, for her part, opened up to him in ways she had never opened up to anyone, telling him about her childhood as a professor's daughter, her love of books and learning, her dreams of making a difference in the world. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, and Samuel discovered that Victoria had a sharp wit and a dry sense of humor that perfectly complemented his more serious nature. She challenged him intellectually in ways he had never been challenged before, and she was not afraid to disagree with him when she thought he was wrong. He loved that about her, loved that she was his equal in every way that mattered. The town watched their courtship with approval and not a little curiosity. Mrs. Henderson took credit for bringing them together, claiming that her hospitality had given Victoria a safe place to recover and bloom. Thomas Wright told anyone who would listen that he had known immediately that Samuel and Victoria were perfect for each other. Even Pete Thompson, who was normally taciturn to the point of silence, admitted that he had never seen Samuel so happy, but it was not all perfect. There were moments when Victoria would grow quiet and distant, and Samuel learned that she was haunted by memories of her time with Marcus Halloway. She had nightmares sometimes, waking up in the middle of the night convinced she was back in that locked room with nothing but bread and water. Samuel wished he could hunt Halloway down and make him pay for what he had done, but Victoria asked him not to. "Revenge will not heal what was broken," she told him one evening as they sat on the porch of the hotel watching the stars come out. "I would rather focus on building something new than dwelling on what was taken from me." "You are a better person than I am," Samuel said, his arm around her shoulders. "If someone hurt you like that again, I do not know if I could be so forgiving." "I am not forgiving him," Victoria corrected. "I am choosing to not let him have any more power over my life. There is a difference." Summer turned to autumn, and Victoria moved into the cabin behind the schoolhouse. It was a tiny place, just 2 rooms and a loft, but she made it cozy with curtains Mrs. Henderson helped her sew, and a few pieces of furniture Samuel built for her. The school year started, and Victoria threw herself into teaching with a passion that amazed everyone who saw her work. She had 23 students ranging in age from 6 to 14, and she managed to keep every single one of them engaged and learning. Samuel would ride into town after his work was done and help her prepare lessons, and he found himself falling more in love with her every day. The way she talked about her students with such genuine affection, the way her whole face lit up when one of them grasped a difficult concept, the way she never gave up on even the most challenging children, it all showed him the depth of her character and the generosity of her spirit. It was on a crisp October evening, with the leaves on the cottonwood trees turning gold and the air smelling of wood smoke and autumn, that Samuel decided he could not wait any longer. He had been carrying his grandmother's ring in his pocket for 2 weeks, waiting for the perfect moment, and he finally realized that every moment with Victoria was perfect. He took her on a ride out to his ranch, ostensibly to show her some improvements he had made to the barn, but really because he wanted her to see the place that would be their home if she agreed to marry him. They stood on the porch of his house as the sun set, painting the prairie in shades of orange and purple, and Samuel took both of her hands in his. "Victoria, I know we have only known each other for 4 months, and some people might say that is not long enough to make a decision like this. But I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I love your strength and your intelligence and your compassion. I love the way you laugh and the way you challenge me and the way you make me want to be a better man. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, building a future together and filling this house with love and laughter and maybe someday children. Will you marry me?" Victoria's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling as they spilled down her cheeks. "Yes, 1,000 times yes. Samuel, you saved my life in more ways than one, and I cannot imagine spending my future with anyone else. I love you so much it frightens me sometimes." Samuel slipped the ring onto her finger, a simple gold band with a small diamond that had belonged to his grandmother, and then he kissed her with all the love and hope and promise that was bursting out of his chest. Victoria kissed him back with equal fervor, and when they finally broke apart, they were both laughing and crying at the same time. "When should we get married?" Victoria asked, looking down at the ring on her finger with wonder. "As soon as possible," Samuel said. "I have waited my whole life to find you, Victoria Zimmerman. I do not want to wait any longer than we have to." They decided on a wedding date in early November, giving them just enough time to make arrangements and send word to Samuel's family in Texas. His mother and sisters made the long journey north, and Samuel watched with joy as they embraced Victoria and welcomed her into the family with open arms. His mother pulled him aside the night before the wedding and told him with tears in her eyes that she had never seen him so happy, and that she could tell Victoria was exactly the right woman for him. The wedding took place in the small church in Sioux Falls on a cold but sunny November day. The entire town turned out for the ceremony, eager to celebrate the love story that had begun so dramatically on that train platform just 5 months earlier. Victoria wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Henderson had helped her make, and she carried a bouquet of dried wildflowers that Samuel had picked for her from the prairie. When Samuel saw her walking down the aisle toward him, his breath caught in his throat. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, and the love shining in her eyes was a gift he knew he would spend the rest of his life trying to deserve. They said their vows in strong, clear voices, promising to love and honor each other through whatever life brought their way. And when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was full of all the promise of their future together. The reception was held at the hotel, and it turned into a genuine celebration with music and dancing and more food than Samuel had seen in one place since he left Texas. Pete Thompson got drunk, and made a surprisingly eloquent toast about how Samuel was the best man he had ever worked for, and how Victoria was clearly the only woman brave enough to take him on. Mrs. Henderson cried happy tears and told everyone she had known from the very beginning that this was how things would turn out. Thomas Wright presented them with a complete set of books for their future home, carefully selected from his own library. As the evening wore on and the celebration continued around them, Samuel pulled Victoria onto the dance floor and held her close as they swayed to a fiddle tune one of the ranch hands was playing. "How does it feel to be Mrs. Crawford?" he asked, his lips close to her ear. "It feels like coming home," she said, and he could hear the emotion in her voice. "Samuel, 5 months ago I was on a train headed toward what I thought was a life of slavery and degradation. I had given up hope. I thought my life was over. And then you stood on that platform and said that no woman was currency in your home, and everything changed. You gave me back my life, and now you have given me your name and your home and your heart. I will spend the rest of my days trying to be worthy of that gift." "You are already worthy," Samuel said fiercely. "Victoria, you are the bravest, strongest, most remarkable woman I have ever known. I am the one who needs to be worthy of you." They stayed at the party until late, neither of them wanting the magical evening to end. But eventually, Samuel helped Victoria into his wagon, and they rode out to the ranch under a sky full of stars. It was their wedding night, and Samuel carried her over the threshold of their home with a mixture of tenderness and desire that made Victoria's breath catch. The intimacy they shared that night was everything Samuel had dreamed of and more. Victoria came to him with trust and love and a passion that matched his own. And as they lay together afterward in the darkness, Samuel felt a completeness he had never experienced before. This was what he had been building toward all along, he realized. Not just a ranch or a legacy, but a life shared with someone who understood him and challenged him and loved him exactly as he was. Winter came early that year, covering the prairie in snow and forcing everyone to hunker down and wait for spring. Samuel and Victoria spent those long winter months learning to live together as husband and wife. And Samuel discovered that marriage to Victoria was even better than courtship had been. She was affectionate and playful, surprising him with kisses when he came in from feeding the cattle, reading to him by the firelight in the evenings, challenging him to games of chess that often ended in laughter and more kisses. They talked about their hopes for the future, about expanding the ranch and maybe adding some sheep to their cattle operation. Victoria continued teaching, riding into town 3 days a week, even when the snow was deep, because she refused to let her students fall behind. Samuel worried about her making that ride in the cold, but he also knew better than to try to stop her. Victoria was not a woman who could be kept in a cage, even a comfortable one. It was in February, when the worst of the winter was behind them but spring still felt far away, that Victoria told Samuel she was pregnant. They were sitting by the fire after dinner, Victoria curled up against his side with a quilt over their legs, when she took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "There is a baby growing in here," she said softly. "Our baby. I am almost 3 months along." Samuel felt like his heart might burst from his chest. "You are sure?" "I am sure. I saw the doctor last week when I was in town. He says the baby should come in late summer, probably August." She looked up at him with those storm-gray eyes, and he saw happiness and a little bit of fear there. "Are you happy, Samuel? I know we have not been married very long." "Happy?" Samuel pulled her into his lap and held her tight, burying his face in her hair. "Victoria, I am beyond happy. I am ecstatic, terrified but ecstatic. We are going to have a baby. You are going to be a mother, and I am going to be a father, and we are going to have a family. "I love you," she whispered against his neck. "I love you so much, Samuel Crawford." "I love you too," he said, "more than I knew it was possible to love another person." The pregnancy transformed Victoria in ways Samuel had not expected. She glowed with health and happiness, her body changing to accommodate the new life growing inside her. She had to stop teaching in April when the ride into town became too uncomfortable, and she spent her days at the ranch helping with light work and preparing the house for the baby's arrival. Samuel built a cradle from oak wood, sanding it until it was smooth as silk, and Victoria sewed tiny clothes and blankets while humming contentedly. In May, Samuel received a letter that made his blood run cold. It was from a lawyer in Chicago, informing him that Marcus Holloway had filed a lawsuit claiming that Victoria was still legally bound to work off her father's debts, and that Samuel had illegally interfered with a valid contract. The letter demanded that Victoria be returned to Holloway's custody immediately, or that Samuel pay the full $12,000 her father had owed. Samuel read the letter 3 times, rage building with each reading. He had known Holloway was a snake, but he had not expected the man to pursue this vendetta so long after the fact. The timing was particularly cruel, coming when Victoria was pregnant and happy and finally building the life she deserved. He did not want to tell Victoria about the letter, but he also refused to keep secrets from his wife. That evening after dinner, he showed her the letter and watched her face go pale. "He is never going to let me go," she said, her voice shaking. "Samuel, what if he can make this stick? What if a court decides I really do owe him money for my father's debts? We do not have $12,000. We would lose the ranch." "That is not going to happen," Samuel said firmly. "Victoria, what Holloway did to you was illegal. You cannot be held responsible for your father's gambling debts, and even if you could be, he had no right to kidnap you and ship you west like property. We are going to fight this, and we are going to win." Samuel hired the best lawyer in Dakota Territory, a man named James Porter, who had a reputation for being tough and brilliant. James reviewed the case and confirmed what Samuel had already believed. Holloway's claims had no legal standing. The problem was that Holloway had money and connections, and he was filing his lawsuit in Illinois where he had friendly judges. "He is trying to bankrupt you with legal fees even if he cannot win the case," James explained. "Men like Holloway know how to use the legal system as a weapon. But I think we can fight him. The question is whether you are willing to see this through, even if it gets expensive and ugly." "Whatever it takes," Samuel said. "I will not let that man hurt my wife again." The legal battle stretched through the summer, with letters and depositions and legal arguments flying back and forth between South Dakota and Illinois. Samuel tried to shield Victoria from the worst of it, but she insisted on being involved in every decision. She was not going to hide, she said. She was not going to let Holloway make her feel like a victim again. In August, just 2 weeks before the baby was due, James Porter came to the ranch with news. The Illinois judge had thrown out Holloway's lawsuit, ruling that the claims had no merit, and that Holloway had engaged in illegal conduct by detaining Victoria against her will. Furthermore, the judge had ordered Holloway to pay their legal fees and had referred the matter to the district attorney for potential criminal charges. "You won," James said, grinning. "It is completely over. Holloway cannot touch you ever again." Victoria burst into tears of relief, and Samuel held her while she cried and laughed at the same time. It was finally over. They were finally free. The nightmare that had begun on that train platform more than a year ago was finished, and they could move forward without looking over their shoulders. Their son was born on August 23, 1879, After a long and difficult labor that left Samuel pacing the floor and praying harder than he had ever prayed in his life. When the midwife finally emerged from the bedroom and told him he had a healthy baby boy and that Victoria was going to be fine, Samuel nearly collapsed with relief. He went into the bedroom and found Victoria propped up on pillows, exhausted but smiling, with a tiny bundle in her arms. When she pulled back the blanket to show him their son, Samuel felt tears streaming down his face. The baby was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air as he made small mewling sounds. "He is beautiful," Samuel said, his voice choked with emotion. "You are both beautiful. Do you want to hold him?" Victoria asked. Samuel took his son in his arms with infinite care, terrified he might somehow break this tiny, precious life. The baby opened his eyes, and Samuel saw that they were gray like his mother's, and in that moment, Samuel felt his heart expand to hold even more love than he had thought possible. "What should we name him?" Victoria asked. They had discussed names for months, but now that the baby was actually here, Samuel found himself thinking of his father, the man who had taught him what it meant to be honorable and good. "What do you think about Robert? After my father, Robert Crawford," Victoria said, testing the name. "I like it. Robert Samuel Crawford." "That is perfect," Samuel said, and he leaned down to kiss his wife and then his son, overcome with gratitude for the family he had been given. The first year of Robert's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and small miracles. Samuel discovered that fatherhood suited him, and he loved every aspect of it, from changing diapers to walking the floor with a colicky baby to watching Robert's face light up when Samuel came into the room. Victoria was a natural mother, patient and loving and endlessly creative in keeping their son entertained and stimulated. The ranch prospered as well, as Samuel's reputation for honest dealing and quality livestock brought him more and more business. He hired 2 more ranch hands to help with the increased workload, and he began planning an expansion that would double the size of their grazing land. Victoria went back to teaching part-time when Robert was a year old, bringing him to the schoolhouse with her and creating a small play area where he could occupy himself while she taught. On their second wedding anniversary, Samuel and Victoria stood on the porch of their home watching the sunset and reflecting on how far they had come. Robert was asleep inside, and the prairie stretched out before them in endless waves of grass turned gold by the fading light. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had accepted Holloway's payment?" Victoria asked. "If you had just taken me as settlement for that debt?" "Never," Samuel said immediately. "That was never even a possibility in my mind. From the moment I saw you, I knew you were not currency. You were a person who deserved respect and freedom and every chance to build the life you wanted." "You changed my life that day," Victoria said softly. "You saw me when everyone else saw property, and you gave me back my humanity." "I will never forget that, Samuel. No matter how many years we have together, I will never take for granted the gift you gave me that day on the platform." "The gift was mutual," Samuel said, pulling her close. "You walked into my life and made me understand what I had been missing all along. I thought I was building a legacy with this ranch, but the real legacy is what we are building together. Our family, our love, the life we are creating. That is what matters." They stood together as the stars began to come out, and Samuel felt a profound sense of contentment settle over him. This was what he had been searching for all along, even when he had not known he was searching. Not just success or achievement, but belonging. Coming home to Victoria and Robert every night, sharing meals and laughter and the ordinary moments that made up a life that was the real treasure. 2 years later, Victoria gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Sarah after Samuel's sister. Sarah had her father's dark eyes and her mother's stubborn determination, and from the moment she arrived, she had both her parents wrapped around her tiny finger. Robert was a devoted big brother, always wanting to help with the baby and proudly telling anyone who would listen that he had a sister. The ranch continued to grow and prosper, and Samuel became known throughout Dakota Territory as a man of integrity who always kept his word. Victoria's school was considered one of the best in the region, and families moved to Sioux Falls specifically so their children could study with her. The cabin behind the schoolhouse had long since been replaced with a proper schoolhouse building, and Victoria had hired an assistant teacher to help with the growing number of students. In 1883, when Robert was 4 and Sarah was 1, Samuel and Victoria hosted a gathering at their ranch to celebrate the completion of a new barn and the 5th anniversary of their marriage. Friends and neighbors came from miles around, and the celebration lasted well into the night with music and dancing and more food than Samuel had thought possible. Pete Thompson, now officially the ranch foreman, stood up and made another toast. 5 years ago, I watched Samuel meet Victoria on the worst day of her life, and I watched him make a choice that changed both their lives forever. He said no woman was currency in his home, and he meant it. That decision brought him the greatest blessing a man could ask for: a good woman, a strong family, and a love that anyone with eyes can see is real and lasting. To Samuel and Victoria, may you have 50 more years just as happy as these first 5. Everyone cheered and raised their glasses, and Samuel pulled Victoria into his arms for a kiss that made several people whistle and laugh. But Samuel did not care what anyone thought. He only cared about the woman in his arms and the life they had built together. Later that night, after all the guests had gone home and the children were asleep, Samuel and Victoria lay in bed together talking about the future. They wanted more children, they decided. They wanted to watch their family grow and flourish. Samuel talked about his dream of eventually passing the ranch down to Robert, and any future sons they might have, of creating something that would last for generations. Victoria talked about her dream of opening a real academy someday, a place where children could get a quality education regardless of whether their families had money. "We have built a good life," Victoria said, her head on Samuel's chest. "Better than I ever imagined possible when I was locked in that room in Chicago. Sometimes I still cannot believe this is real, that I get to wake up every morning next to you and kiss our children and work at something I love. It feels like a dream." "It is real," Samuel said, tightening his arms around her. "You are real, our family is real, and this love is the most real thing I have ever known. Victoria, I know the path that brought you to me was painful and unjust, but I will be grateful every day of my life that you ended up here. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. And you are the best thing that ever happened to me," she whispered. "My hero, my husband, my best friend, I love you, Samuel Crawford, with everything I am." The years continued to pass, bringing with them the joys and challenges of ranch life and raising a family on the Dakota prairie. In 1885, Victoria gave birth to their 3rd child, another son they named Thomas after the school board chairman who had given Victoria her teaching position. In 1888, their 4th child arrived, a daughter they named Rebecca after Samuel's sister. Their house, which had once seemed so spacious, was now filled with the chaos and laughter of 4 children, and Samuel could not imagine it any other way. Robert grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the ranch and showed every sign of following in his father's footsteps. Sarah was wild and free-spirited, more interested in climbing trees and racing horses than in the ladylike pursuits Victoria occasionally tried to encourage. Thomas was quiet and bookish like his mother, always with his nose in some volume or another. Rebecca was still too young to show her personality fully, but she had already demonstrated that she had inherited both her parents' stubborn streaks. The ranch had become one of the most successful operations in the region, and Samuel had earned a reputation as a fair employer who treated his workers well and paid them honestly. Pete Thompson was still the foreman, though he was getting on in years and talked sometimes about retiring. Several of the men who worked for Samuel had been with him for years, and they had become like family. Victoria's school had grown to the point where she now oversaw 3 teachers and more than 80 students. She had realized her dream of creating a real academy, and children came from all over the region to study under her guidance. She had written and published a textbook on teaching methods that was being used in schools across the West, and she was occasionally invited to speak at educational conferences in larger cities. On a warm summer evening in 1890, Samuel and Victoria celebrated their 12th wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner after the children had been put to bed. They sat on the porch of their home, the same porch where Samuel had proposed so many years ago, and watched the sun set over the prairie that had become the backdrop of their lives. 12 years, Victoria said wonderingly. It seems like both a lifetime and no time at all. I know what you mean, Samuel said, reaching for her hand. Sometimes I look at you and I am right back on that train platform, seeing you for the first time and knowing my life was about to change. Other times I look at you and I cannot remember what my life was like before you were in it. Do you ever regret it? Victoria asked. Taking on a penniless woman with nothing but problems and a terrible past. Not for 1 second, Samuel said firmly. Victoria, you were never nothing but problems. You were everything I did not know I was looking for. You are my partner, my best friend, the mother of my children, and the love of my life. If I could go back to that day on the platform, I would make the same choice 1,000 times over. Victoria leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. After a while, she spoke again, her voice soft with emotion. I used to have nightmares about what my life would have been like if you had not been on that platform that day. What if someone else had been there to collect on Holloway's debt? What if that person had not cared that I was human, that I deserved freedom and dignity? I would have been a slave, Samuel. I would have lost everything, including myself. But that did not happen, Samuel reminded her gently. I was there, and I made the choice to stand up for what was right, and we found each other. You do not have to torture yourself with what-ifs, my love. We are here now together, and we have built something beautiful. You are right, Victoria said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. We have built something beautiful. Our family, our home, our life together, it is everything I never dared to dream of when I was in that dark place. They talked late into the night about their hopes and dreams for the future, about their children and their plans for the ranch and the school. They talked about taking a trip back to Texas someday so the children could spend more time with Samuel's mother and sisters. They talked about maybe building a bigger house, since 4 children had definitely outgrown the current space. They talked about the possibility of one day retiring and traveling, seeing the parts of the country and world they had only read about in books. But mostly they just sat together, holding hands and watching the stars wheel overhead, grateful beyond measure for the life they had been given and the love they had found in each other. The seasons continued to turn, bringing the harvest time of autumn and the quiet waiting of winter. Christmas of 1890 was a joyous affair, with the house full of children's laughter and the scent of pine boughs and baking bread. Samuel's mother and sisters came to visit, and the house was almost bursting at the seams with family. But it was perfect, Samuel thought. This was what he had always wanted, what he had been building toward all those years ago when he first came to Dakota Territory. In the spring of 1891, Samuel and Victoria took a trip to the state capital with several other ranchers and business owners to lobby for better schools and infrastructure in the rural areas. It was Victoria's first real trip away from home since the children had been born, and though she missed them terribly, she also loved having time alone with Samuel. They stayed in a hotel and dined in restaurants and attended the theater, and Samuel was reminded all over again of how remarkable his wife was. She held her own in meetings with politicians and businessmen, arguing passionately for the importance of education and making points that even the most skeptical listeners had to acknowledge as valid. "You are amazing," Samuel told her one night as they walked back to their hotel after a particularly successful meeting. "Watching you in there, holding your own with all those men who thought they could dismiss you, because you are a woman, it made me so proud I could hardly stand it." "I learned from the best," Victoria said, squeezing his hand. "You taught me that standing up for what is right matters more than what other people think. You showed me that by example, Samuel, when you refused to let me be treated as property. Everything I am, everything I have accomplished, it all starts with that moment when you saw me as a person worth fighting for." They returned home to find the children had been spoiled rotten by Pete Thompson and the ranch hands, and that the house was in reasonably good shape, despite the chaos of 4 children being left in the care of well-meaning but inexperienced cowboys. Sarah had apparently decided to teach the horse in the corral how to dance, and Thomas had been caught trying to read by candlelight in the hayloft. Robert had been his usual responsible self, and Rebecca had charmed everyone into giving her extra sweets. It was good to be home. That summer, Samuel hired a photographer to come to the ranch and take a family portrait. It was an expensive luxury, but he wanted a record of this moment, this perfect time when their children were young and their life together was full and complete. The photograph showed Samuel standing behind Victoria, who was seated with Rebecca on her lap. Robert, Sarah, and Thomas stood beside them, all dressed in their Sunday best and trying to look serious for the camera. When Samuel looked at that photograph in later years, he would remember the feeling of that day. The warmth of the sun on his shoulders, the sound of Victoria's laughter when Sarah had made a face right before the photographer snapped the picture, the weight of Robert's hand on his arm as his eldest son stood tall and proud beside him. It was a moment of pure happiness, captured forever in sepia tones. The years continued to pass, bringing changes both large and small. Dakota Territory became a state in 1889, split into North and South Dakota, and Sioux Falls continued to grow from a frontier town into a proper city. The railroad expanded its lines, bringing more settlers and more commerce. The Wild West of Samuel's youth was slowly being tamed, though the spirit of independence and possibility that had drawn him here in the first place remained strong. Samuel and Victoria's children grew from babies into young people with dreams and personalities of their own. Robert became Samuel's right hand on the ranch, learning everything his father could teach him about raising cattle and managing land. Sarah shocked everyone by announcing at age 16 that she wanted to be a veterinarian, a nearly unheard-of profession for a woman. But Victoria supported her daughter's ambitions fiercely and helped her find an apprenticeship with the local animal doctor. Thomas went east to college to study law, determined to make a difference in the world through the legal system. Rebecca showed signs of following in her mother's footsteps, with a love of teaching and a gift for connecting with children. Through it all, Samuel and Victoria's love only deepened. They faced challenges together: droughts that threatened the ranch, an illness that nearly took Thomas's life when he was 12, the heartbreak of Victoria's miscarriage in 1893 when she was 42, and they had hoped for one more child. But they also celebrated triumphs together. The year the ranch had its best profits ever, the publication of Victoria's second textbook, the graduations and weddings and births of grandchildren as their children grew up and started families of their own. On a cold November day in 1903, Samuel and Victoria celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary. Their house, which had been expanded twice over the years, was full of family. Robert was there with his wife Emma and their 3 children. Sarah had come from Omaha, where she was working as one of the first female veterinarians in the region, bringing with her the young doctor she was courting. Thomas arrived from Chicago with his wife and 2 daughters. Rebecca lived nearby with her husband, a teacher she had met at Victoria's school, and their infant son. As Samuel looked around the table at dinner that night, seeing 3 generations of family gathered together, he felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This was the legacy he had been trying to build all those years ago, but it was so much better than anything he could have imagined. Not just a successful ranch or a prosperous business, but a family built on love and respect, and the values he and Victoria had worked so hard to instill in their children. After dinner, when the younger grandchildren had been put to bed and the older family members were lingering over coffee and dessert, Robert stood and raised his glass. "I want to make a toast to my parents," he said, his voice carrying across the room. 25 years ago, my father made a choice that changed all of our lives. He saw a woman being treated as property, and he refused to accept it. He said that no woman was currency in his home, and he meant it. That choice brought him my mother, and it brought the rest of us into existence. More than that, it taught us all a lesson about the kind of people we want to be. My parents have shown us through their example what it means to love with integrity, to stand up for what is right even when it is hard, and to build a life based on honor and respect. Dad, Mom, thank you for everything you have given us. Happy anniversary. Everyone raised their glasses and echoed the sentiment, and Samuel looked at Victoria to find tears streaming down her face. He reached for her hand and brought it to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "I love you," he said, just for her. "More today than yesterday and less than tomorrow." "I love you too," she whispered back. "My hero, my husband, my Samuel." Later that night, after all the family had either gone home or been settled in guest rooms, Samuel and Victoria stood together on the porch looking out at the prairie. It was the same view they had shared for 25 years, but it never got old. The vastness of the land, the endless sky full of stars, the sense of possibility and freedom, it still moved Samuel just as much as it had when he first arrived in Dakota Territory all those years ago. "What are you thinking about?" Victoria asked, leaning against him. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Samuel said honestly. "I am thinking about that day on the train platform when you stepped into my life, and how I had no idea that refusing to treat you as property was going to be the best decision I ever made. I am thinking about our children and grandchildren, and about the life we have built together. I am thinking about how much I love you and how I hope we have at least another 25 years together." "God willing," Victoria said softly. "Samuel, do you remember what you said to me the night you proposed? You said that you wanted to spend the rest of your life building a future together and filling the house with love and laughter. You have done that, my darling. We have done that together. Our house is full of love, our family is thriving, and our legacy is secure. Our legacy is not the ranch or the school or any of those external things," Samuel said. Our legacy is the love we share and the values we have passed on to our children. That is what will last long after we are gone." They stood in comfortable silence, two people who had grown so close over the years that words were often unnecessary. Samuel thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment, from that desperate day on the train platform to this beautiful evening surrounded by family and love. It had not always been easy. There had been hardships and heartbreaks along the way, but they had faced everything together, and their love had only grown stronger through it all. "Victoria," Samuel said suddenly, turning to face her fully, "I want you to know something. If I had my life to live over again, if I could go back and change anything, I would not. Every choice I made, every path I took, it all led me to you. You are my greatest blessing, and loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life." Victoria's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling as she reached up to cup his face in her hands. "Samuel Crawford, you walked into my darkest hour and gave me back my life. You saw me when I felt invisible, valued me when I felt worthless, and loved me when I thought I was unlovable. Everything good in my life flows from that moment when you refused to let me be treated as less than human. I love you with all that I am, and I will love you until the day I die and beyond." Samuel kissed her then, under the vast Dakota sky with the stars shining overhead, and it felt just as right and perfect as it had that first time by the river all those years ago. They had built a beautiful life together, a life full of love and meaning and purpose. And as they stood there holding each other, both of them knew with absolute certainty that they would face whatever came next the same way they had faced everything else together, with love, and with an unwavering commitment to the values that had brought them together in the first place. The train had brought Victoria to Samuel as payment for a debt that was never hers to pay. But Samuel had refused that payment, recognizing that no human being could ever be currency in a decent man's home. That choice, that fundamental belief in the dignity and worth of every person, had been the foundation on which they built everything else. It had been the seed from which their love grew, the bedrock on which their family was established, and the principle that guided them through all the years of their marriage. And as they finally went inside to bed, their hands still clasped together, both Samuel and Victoria knew that they had found something precious and rare, a love that had been tested and proven, a partnership built on mutual respect and admiration, and a life that honored the best in both of them. The Wild West around them might be changing, growing tamer and more civilized with each passing year, but the love they shared remained as wild and free and unbreakable as the prairie itself. Their story, which had begun with an act of moral courage on a train platform in Sioux Falls, South Dakota in 1878, had become a testament to the power of choosing right over easy, of seeing the humanity in others even when the world tried to reduce them to mere commodities, and of building a life based on love and integrity rather than convention and profit. It was a story their children and grandchildren would tell for generations, and its message would endure long after Samuel and Victoria had passed into memory, that every person has inherent worth and dignity, that love can bloom even in the hardest circumstances, and that the choices we make in our darkest hours can illuminate the rest of our lives. As Samuel drifted off to sleep that night with Victoria in his arms, he felt a profound sense of peace and completion. He had lived a good life, loved a remarkable woman, and left the world a little better than he had found it. And really, what more could any man ask for?